Hello and welcome to the second lesson in Unit 1 of GCSE Sociology at OPA. Your title for today's lesson is What is the Sociological Legacy of Emile Durkheim? So just as you'll do now, thinking back to the sociological imagination learnt in Lesson 1, I want you to look at these scenarios and distinguish whether the consequence is caused by society, so is it macro or is it micro based on the individual factors, or maybe it's a bit of both. If you could just write down your answers and perhaps pause the video just for the next 5 minutes. As the stretch and challenge, perhaps write down next to the situation explaining why it's a macro or a micro situation. Right, so I'm going to go through them now, bit by bit, just explaining it. So Barry is unemployed. The economy has gone into a recession due to poor management. Like many others, his company are not forced, or are forced to make redundancies rather, my apologies. So that would be a macro factor. That's something out of the hands of the individual. So the individual is perhaps been made redundant based on the state of the economy, not based on the individual. So moving on to the next one, Stacey is sent to prison. She has been found guilty of assault after getting into an argument with her friend Dawn about Love Island. So that's predominantly a micro one. That's down to the individual getting themselves in that situation. So we've got another one again. Barry is unemployed. He has little motivation and mucked around in school. He doesn't respond, well, we should say, to instructions and is easily distracted. So again, that would be micro. Okay, it's the individual who's choosing to be lazy, or it's based on individual's ability and skill. So we had that example, I think, in the last lesson. So the next two are kind of interesting ones because you could argue they're a little bit of both. Carl is a victim of racial abuse during a night out with friends. So of course that's micro because it's down to the individual interaction, but that individual interaction might largely be influenced by macro factors like racism. And then we've got the last one, Stacey is sent to prison. She's been found guilty of mugging local residents. She has no job and a family to feed. So of course, Stacey's made that decision to resort to that. But as well, it might be that there are macro factors going along with that. So there might be issues of deprivation and poverty, which link into economic factors. Okay, so we should start to really, over the next coming lessons, start to understand more this sociological imagination and the idea of that, and the macro and the micro distinctions, and sometimes how they can work together. Right, so we're going to look at Emile Durkheim's early life first. So he was born in France. He grew up during the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. So if we remember back to last lesson, this is a time of industrialization, a time of urbanization, so people moving to the cities. And it's also a time of the Napoleonic Wars, though. So this is a time when the monarchy's been overthrown and France is forming a republic. So there's lots of social change going on at the time. Okay, and Durkheim is very similar to Comte. Okay, he also wants to study sociology in a scientific way. So he's aiming for sociology to be a scientific study of societies. In other words, he's a positivist. Like I said, we're going to come on to that in perhaps Unit 2 or later on in the unit. So this is the first concept that Durkheim really emphasizes, and I'd like you to write down a definition of this as your first task. Okay, and that's social fact. So Durkheim argued, or is argued, to be the father of functionalism, which is a theory we're going to be looking at in the coming lessons. It's a theory that is strongly associated with structuralists, so this idea that structures influence us in the world. And structurists concentrate on macro sociology. Okay, so they look at structures like the family, religion, and media, and how they influence the individual. Durkheim supported this idea, coining the term social fact. This meant that any social situation where there are norms, values, and roles involved could be explained in terms of the societal structure around them. So, for example, you might have a role at work. You might have certain values at work. You might have certain norms, so certain behaviors at work. And that's based on the structure around you of work. But that might vary and might be very different to the family structure. So you might have different norms, values, and roles within the family. And Durkheim's really just trying to acknowledge that and try to explain a social context and a social situation in terms of the macro around it. And that's what's referred to as a social fact. So you've got the definition in red at the bottom there. If you could please write that down. Right, so the second concept that Durkheim emphasizes, and this is a really, really key one, arguably the most important one in my eyes, is the whole idea of the organic analogy. Okay, so like a body, okay, dependent on lots of different organs, society is made up of lots of different elements working together. So society needs, for its development, cooperation. And this is what Durkheim refers to as the organic analogy. So he likes to use this analogy because each organ has a specific role, but they all work together and essentially keep the person alive, just like society. It's a living thing. There are other analogies. There's a mechanical analogy as well. So think of it like a car with all the different parts, you know, the engine, the suspension, it might be the tires, whatever it may be. Okay, all these different things having their specific jobs, but coming together and functioning. And when they all function together and they all are working, this cooperation is often referred to as social cohesion. So if you, just for task 2, could get a summary down of the organic analogy, perhaps you might want to take a screenshot of that image, or perhaps draw your own one as well. And can you think of, for your stretch and challenge, any examples where structures are cooperating and working together in society? So I'll just give you 30 seconds there. You might want to pause the video. Okay, so the next bit, so this is task 3 now, and we're coming on to the third concept that Durkheim emphasizes. This is the division of labor. You might have heard this concept in perhaps business studies or perhaps citizenship, some of your other subjects. And again, for task 3, I just want you to answer these 2 questions. What is the division of labor according to Durkheim? And what role do you or your family have in the division of labor? And for your stretch and challenge, why do you think negative roles might be beneficial to society? So if you just read through that information, and then I will discuss it after 5 minutes. So you might want to pause it, give yourself 5 minutes, and then discuss after. Right, so Durkheim believed the division of labor and everyone having a role within a modern society. So for example, I will have various roles. I might have the role of a teacher. I might have the role of a friend. I might have the role of a son. I might have the role of a father. It's various roles, just like you yourself have the role of a student, friend, and so forth, maybe an employee. So this was the belief that individuals have specific roles within society that led to social cohesion. That's the key bit there. And even these negative roles had a place in society. So we're going to come on to this later on in the slides, but For example, if you're a criminal, it's going to act as an example of what not to do in society. Your role there is to act as a negative role model to show people what not to do. Or it might be that there is inequality. So let's say, for example, class inequality. Functionalism and Durkheim do believe that a little bit of class inequality is okay. They think that it, for example, shows that some people don't work hard and that their place is warranted at the bottom of society. Right, so again, very similar. You're just going to note down this this next concept, enemy. Okay, and this is one really associated with the sociology of crime and deviance, but it is used by Durkheim to describe what happens when that social cohesion breaks down. So not everyone follows social rules and things may break down in society. This is referred to as enemy. So if you could write that down, please. Durkheim believed that some enemy could be a good thing in two ways. So it would remind people of what not to do. So that example I used before about the criminal. But also some people may find themselves on the negative side of the division of labor. And that's just the nature of the beast and how things are. But if there was a lot of enemy, where people were not following values, norms, and roles, then it would be a reminder of two possible social fact scenarios. Either one, that society needed changing, and that society is essentially corrupt. So think of it again like an organ. So perhaps an organ needs to be transplanted in order for the body to be at 100% again, or a car needing a new tire. But it could also be that society was going through a change, and therefore there was this short-term instability, this teething process. So some examples, I'm just going to give you a moment. You might want to pause the video for the stretch and challenge and just come up with your own. And then after, when you start it again, I'll give you some examples to think of. Right, so it may be that it's, for an example, that something needs to change. It may be that a law or a policy, or there's lots of inequality. Let's concentrate on class here. It might be that there's lots of poverty in a country, and that people are resorting to crime because they're poor. They can't get a job. They have no means of an income. So it's an indicator there, a social fact showing us that some structures need to be altered in society. Okay. But it also might be an example there that something is new, and it might be, say, for example, let's refer to lockdown with COVID. It might be that in the short term, people getting used to lockdown, there's an increase in crime rates, or there's an increase in mental health issues, or something along those lines, as a result of people adjusting to this lockdown. There are other examples that you can look at on the web. Right, so task 5 now. You're going to look through these various statements, and you're just really going to concentrate on perhaps what Durkheim's observations would be about these various scenarios. So just think of those key terms that we've gone over previously. So you've got social facts, you've got social cohesion, division of labor, organic analogy, social cohesion. Okay, think of those concepts and think, do any of them apply? Okay, is there something there that stands out, and try to think of an explanation. So again, you're going to pause the video for 5 minutes. You're going to try and in the speech bubbles, just write down any key concepts from Durkheim that apply. Right, so just to go through them, I'm just going to read the statements and then just say what might apply. So James is 45, an engineer for the Royal Navy. He has a family, a husband and 2 daughters who he loves very much. James was never or has never had a criminal record. Okay, so it's this whole idea of his roles and him in the organic analogy. So he is one, a husband. He is obviously a father to two daughters. And he also has the job, doesn't he, of being in the Royal Navy. So he's an engineer. And it would point to there this whole idea of social cohesion. So I was trying to really demonstrate there. He's got no criminal record. Everything is running smoothly. Everything is functional. So the next one, Eve is one of the poorer people in society. She has resorted to shoplifting to fund her social habits. So we've got the example there of a negative role. So an example of what not to do. She's clearly not following the values of society about fairness and the idea of not stealing, and that's considered deviant. It's only her doing it, so it's not considered enemy. But it's an example there of someone who is not following your average and sort of your value consensus that you'll come on to later on, not following the normal norms, values, and roles of society. And then finally, you have Andrew. So Andrew reads a newspaper that states unemployment is up by 20%. He has also noticed that there have been a lot more patients attending his clinic, seeking help for depression. So Durkheim would point out the societal fact there, the fact that there's a correlation, a relationship there between unemployment and depression. Okay, might point out that it's a form of enemy. So the fact that there's some sort of issue in society, or perhaps that there's some sort of change that is leading to this short-term rise in unemployment and depression. Okay, finally, I'm just going to go through some of the positives and the negatives of Durkheim's legacy, really. And then you can make your own judgments there for the stretch and challenge, whether you agree with the idea of structuralists, and maybe more specifically, because we haven't done them all yet, all the structuralists, maybe the ideas of Emile Durkheim. So to go through the positives first, he does give an explanation of how society influences individuals. So he does explain how perhaps your mental health can be worsened, or perhaps why crime rates might increase, or why unemployment might increase. And many do also share this idea of value consensus. They do share this social cohesion. We do follow lots of roles and values and norms collectively, and because of that, function quite well. He also acknowledges what can happen to a society during social change. So he can acknowledge some of the positives and negatives. And he does actually just write a lot, or he did write a lot rather, about things like suicide and its connection to social change in society, as an example. But there are some issues with Durkheim's ideas. So firstly, it's a given, they're kind of dated. So society has moved on since then, and there are lots of things that are different. It also overlooks dysfunction in society. So dysfunction in lots of different ways. So it might be that it overlooks the reality of racism. So that's a lack of social cohesion, or that there is a class struggle, or that there's patriarchy and gender inequality. So that's not cohesion. But also it assumes that there is discohesion in general. So it's this assumption that everything is great, and maybe that some of these structures are not functional. So for example, there are certain family types that Durkheim might promote, and you'll see this later on in functionalism through Parsons' ideas. But it's a bit of assumption that family works and is running smoothly for everyone. And then finally, there's this idea of determinism. It's deterministic, and you'll hear this word quite a lot, and it's a good go-to as a critique for structuralists. It's this idea that it doesn't consider individual will, and it assumes that individuals are passive and that we just follow blindly structures in society. Okay, so you might want to pause the video and just conclude this final task. So this is the first It's the second lesson into the unit, but it's the first looking at the founding fathers of sociology. We're going to be looking for lesson 3 at the sociological legacy of Karl Marx in the next video. Okay, thank you.